Welcome back everybody, my name is Philip and today we're going to have a look at Aurora HDR 2019. Now, as the name suggests, Aurora HDR is an HDR software, but if you have never heard about it or if you're unsure as to what exactly it entails, I suggest that you watch this video first, which will give you all the introduction and tell you exactly what you need in terms of equipment, possible software and possible procedures, and also examples. So, first we're going to go through the interface and then we're going to go and actually edit one or two images just to see how fast we can get them to the way at least I like them. And lastly, the decision of course is up to you if this sounds like something you would be into as well, and then you make that decision for yourself. At the end, we're also going to talk a little bit about pricing should you be interested in getting that, and maybe ways that you can save some dineros. Let's jump right in and create some HDR awesomeness. Now, before we can actually look at the interface that we have in Aurora, first we need to feed it some images to work with. So I have prepared a couple of images here. I'm going to drag and drop simply the first three into Aurora. I just drag and drop them, let it go, and it's going to ask me what I want to do with it. Well, I would like to create an HDR, of course. So first you can see the different exposures that you have for that particular image. And I obviously also want to auto align. Now, very often, even though I do use a tripod in these kind of evening scenarios, it is often windy and stuff like that, so I just want to make sure that everything is perfectly aligned. Mostly hit that align button. Here on the side, in the lower left-hand corner, you also have a little options button. Now, usually I always leave color denoise on, just put it on there. And also ghost reduction is something that you can turn on, for instance, if you have people that move from one image to the other, right? So if I would have a person that in one image is on the beach here, but then the next image is just like 1 or half a meter ahead, then I want to make sure that this person is not double in the merged image. So I could also switch on ghost reduction. In my case, I have waves, as you can see in these images here, so I think it might be a good idea. I'm just going to turn that on. Now, what that means for the process to create the HDR image, normally it's quite fast, but if you leave on auto alignment and if you switch on ghost reduction, the process does take a little bit longer. Now I'm just going to hit the create button, let the software handle it, and wait for some awesomeness. Awesome, here we go. So now we have the merged version of the three images that you have just seen. If I just use this little eye tool here at the top, you can see this is the 0 exposure, and now after the merge we have an HDR image. Cool. So let's check out the interface, the different areas that you have and what you can do at the different places. So first let's have a look at the top here, right? So if you look at the top, you have the good old open button. So that is if you open images to edit them. In our case, we just drag and drop them, so I don't really care about that button, never use it. Then here in the next site or in the next area, you have the zoom in percentage number. So simply if you zoom in and out, that's one's gonna obviously adjust, and you can also use the buttons to zoom in and zoom out. So very self-explanatory. Here it's getting kind of cool because you have this little eye thing and you have a little box thing. Now the eye simply means that any changes you make, I want to compare to the original 0 exposure image. So if I hit that, any changes that you make within Aurora will go away and you'll see the original. Alternatively, you can use that slider to see the before and after, for instance, after you made any changes, or simply after creating the HDR as well. Cool, you can always switch that on and off whenever you feel like. Now the next thing is kind of cool, which is currently grayed out. This is your sort of step back button. So anything you do will be recorded in Aurora HDR so that you can always go back. So you have a proper history with regards to your edits. Right now we haven't done any edits yet, so these things are grayed out and I can't use them yet. Following that, we have the crop button. So if I hit that, you would go into the crop mode, which I normally do rather at the end. So I'm just going to get out of here for now and continue along. Now, you see now on the right hand side you have this panel and you have another panel at the bottom. Let's switch one of these off and concentrate at one after the other. So the first one is on the right hand side here. This is your simple editing panel. Any kind of edits that you do to a certain image that you have just created will happen on the right hand side right here. Now I will go into a little bit more detail in just a moment, but just note for now that this is the editing panel where you make all the changes. And the other one that you have seen at the bottom, just going to switch these two off, these are your pre-prepared looks. So while previously they were called presets, now they're called HDR looks, which is just another word for presets, I guess, but might as well use different words to spice things up every now and again. Cool. So this is essentially a mini version of pre-prepared edits that you can apply to your image upon a click of a button. For instance, Anti-Vegan Tiger is just the name of a look that I can apply with one click to my image. There are a couple of weird ones, like for instance, this one. I'm just going to click through a couple of those. So if you click on that, it will make settings according to that particular look that you have selected. Now you can adjust if you want to have this look fully applied to your image, or if you want to have that very, very little, right? So it goes from the usual 0 to 100%, full or not full. So if you're wondering how many of these looks are there, well, there are loads, and I'm not going to go into all of them. It always loads up the first one to the left-hand side, and then as you scroll through the right, it's going to create the mini versions of the rest. You have the little collections button here, so if you're looking for a specific area, such as landscape or dramatic or whatever, you'll find it here. The cool thing is you can not just create your own looks, but you can also get more looks from famous photographers or whatever you have from people that you like. So if you have a certain person that inspires you and you want to create something that looks very similar to what that person creates, you can most likely get Aurora HDR looks from that person, if that person, of course, uses Aurora HDR. So here we have, for instance, Trey Radcliffe and Serge Ramelli, very big in the HDR world. So, just a little hint. Cool. So what does actually happen when I apply a look? Now, the thing is, that looks super ugly. I don't want that. I need something that we can work with. Let's go somewhere at the beginning and go to maybe balanced interior. Yeah, why not? Let's go somewhere here. Cool. So before I switched off the editing panel, right? Cool, let's bring that back. So if I select a certain look from the thing here at the bottom, the certain area, then it'll make changes according to whatever that preset or that look has in my editing panel, right? So you see with that selected, it made certain changes to the smart tone, it increased the shadows and decreased the highlights a bit more color contrast, a bit less vibrance and stuff like that. So whatever that particular look entailed will be applied in these settings here. That means for you that if you see a look that you like, you don't have to accept it as is. You can always go in, apply a look, and then change the look according to, well, your liking. So enough about looks, let's have a proper view as to the side panel right here where you make all the edits. Let's check out what is available right there. For that, I'm going to just get rid of all the looks because we don't really need them. And I'm also going to reset everything that this particular look has done by simply hitting the reset all button. So usually when I start out, I do go through the looks just to see if there's anything that gives me inspiration. Sometimes I don't know what to do with an image, so I'm just going to go through them. For explanation purposes, I'm just going to go through the side panel right here, step by step. Now, first of all, you'll see here on the top, you have 3 buttons that look very well illuminated. The first one, if you hit that, for instance, it's going to get rid of your levels that you have right here, right? So if you're not interested in that, or if you're just starting out and you don't know what that really means, just get rid of it and it's totally cool. The next thing is layers, right? So if I would disable that, I would lose my layer view, not the layers themselves, just the view. If you don't know what layers are, don't worry, I'm going to go into that in just a moment. And lastly, you have the information button, which simply shows you a couple of information with regards to the images that you're using right now, right? So it's going to show you the ISO, what kind of millimeter you use for your lens, what was the aperture and stuff like that. So if you don't care while you edit that you have to see that, then you just simply get rid of it. I usually get rid of it because I really couldn't care less in that particular moment. Cool. I do usually leave the levels on, I actually never use them really, but might as well have them there. I do that stuff in Photoshop normally. Awesome, so let's have a look at the layers as well as the adjustments that are available. When you open up the image the first time, you'll see your image name, whatever that was for the zero exposure, will show up here as the first layer. Now, at this point, what I would recommend to do, you have 2 buttons here. One is the good old lens correction, and the other one is the transform tool. So if you have the need to use the lens correction to do certain things, I don't know, depends on, on the image, obviously. But if you feel like making any corrections, feel free to do them at that point, and I'll show you in a second why. Also, if you want to use the transform tool, you can do weird things that I don't think I've ever used really, but of course they are available if you do need them. So you have to do them at that point, because if I were to create a new layer now, add new adjustment layer, this option is of course not available for an adjustment layer. This is only available for an image layer itself. Cool, so let's talk about layers a little bit more and give a couple of examples just that you understand how Aurora exactly works when you start to edit. Let's say, let's just go ahead and delete that layer because it makes it a bit easier. Let's say I'm going to start editing and I'm going to, I don't know, bring down my highlights. Let's say I'm going to increase or bring up my shadows a little bit more. Let's bring the whites up a tiny bit and decrease the blacks just a little bit. Actually, let's leave the highlights maybe up a little bit, like maybe something like that is kind of cool. Awesome. Then we're also going to increase the saturation a little bit and maybe add a little bit of clarity. I'm going to go through that stuff in just a second. Cool. So now I made a very basic, well, edits, and they are all under HDR basic, right? Except the color one. So if I now hit the little I button right here, for instance, it's going to show me how the image looks without the adjustments I have just made in this particular cell here, only in the HDR basic. Cool. You can do that for anything, and you can always reset to default settings, which means 0 most of the time, by just hitting the little arrow right here. Now that I have made some changes, you'll see that these changes also show up in my history panel right here, so I can also go back now and make changes, whatever I need to do. Awesome. So let's have a look at the different kind of sections here. We have the basic, as you have just seen, that's for the usual highlights, shadows, temperature, all this kind of stuff. Color, well, quite self-explanatory, that deals with the color. Then we have HDR Enhance, which is a field where I normally go into a little bit of clarity right here. It just adds a certain crispness to the image, and you can have different options as to how to add that crispness, if that's even a word. Then we have some denoise options. So normally when you merge images together, especially in evening situations, you will get the occasional noise into your image, but you can get rid of it by using the HDR denoise. Now, a cool thing that was not previously in Aurora HDR before, is called the LUT mapping. And LUT means look up table. So essentially that is another way that many people share how their own looks are being applied onto their images. For example, if you have famous people or famous photographers or even videographers that have their very own color style, for example, then very often these people sell LUTs, which essentially applies their style to whatever you have. So in this case, you can, for instance, load custom LUTs if you have them, or get them online, of course, from the creators of Aurora as well, if that's needed. But like Peter McKinnon's LUTs, for example, you can buy them and you could apply them to your image. And as you put them in your list, you can live see what such a look change would mean for your particular image. Now, of course, these are random looks that are pre-installed here, and nothing really applies to this particular image, so I'm not gonna actually apply anything because it's looking kind of crap. Awesome. Yeah, but as I said, this is nice if you have somebody you follow and you want to apply a certain look. Then we have image radiance, and I'm just going to demonstrate what that does. If I increase it to mad, it makes the image extremely soft, but also a little bit brighter. Now you can then adjust certain things, for instance, bring out the shadows. Nope, that's the wrong one. Bring out the shadows again a bit more and things like that. It just makes the image fluffy, which sometimes works, but well, many images it might not be really applicable. So I'm just going to reduce it to maybe a tiny bit, something like that. It's kind of cool. Awesome. The polarizing filter on the right makes the sky simply more blue. So if I were to pull that to the right, you'll see the sky gets a bit more blue. But there's also another section where you can do that. The detail boost right here, this section is made for sharpening. So if you do feel like you need to sharpen, you can do that on different levels. I'm not going to demonstrate it because then I would have to zoom in and stuff. So I'm just going to keep going. And we have also the glow. So if I increase the glow, it's going to essentially take the brightest point in the image and add more brightness and whiteness essentially to that particular point, right? So as you see right here, you can also add some warmth to it if you want to, right? So I could do something like that, which is actually kind of cool. Maybe something like that. Interesting. I didn't even realize that this might be a thing. We could leave it, but for now, just to keep the image kind of clean, I'm going to leave it off. We have the adjustable gradient, which means sometimes you're in a scenario where you have a horizon, like you have water in the front, and then you have a sky in the background. And sometimes you need to adjust these two different areas of your image separately. In this case, you can just simply set an adjustable gradient. Let's just take one for here. I'm just going to pop one right here just to show it's going to look probably kind of crap. But now I'm going to decrease the exposure in the top one. Probably actually should do that at the bottom one, right? So we have our line here. So if I choose bottom, everything in the bottom will be adjusted. So let's decrease the exposure, might as well. And in the top, let's say we want to increase the vibrance. I don't know, I'm just making that up. Cool, so this would be a way where you can adjust the top and the bottom half of your image to your liking. You can also turn that around as you need it and to make it larger to make the transition a little bit more smooth as an example. Let's turn that back as well. Cool. Then we have curves. Now, if you have never worked with curves, I'm going to link a proper tutorial down there. They can do many things, from working with different colors, getting rid of certain, if you, for instance, have a very much red image and you like to reduce some red, then you can do that as well. And of course, brightnesses galore. Maybe to make it short, if you drag the curve down, it's going to get dark. If you drag it up, it's going to be bright. Cool. Now, below that we have our HSL compartment, let's call it, or function, which stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. So here you'll be able to selectively, for the different colors in your image, to decide what is the hue, what is the saturation, and what is the luminance. As an example, for instance, I like this, actually we're done here. I like the yellow very much, so I want to pump the yellow maybe up a little bit. So I'm just going to increase the saturation for the yellow. And let's say I'm not a big fan of the blue in the sky, so I'm decreasing that a tiny bit. Just, might as well. At the same time, if I go to luminance, I could now say I want the yellows to be a little bit darker so that they go more into the orange, right? If I wanted to do that. So that is where I have control about that stuff. Moving on to the color toning. And the color toning allows you simply to put a certain touch of a color in the highlights or in your shadows. So the way that works, I'm just going to show you or demonstrate that very quickly. Let's say in our highlights we want to have a more orange color. So I'm going to increase the saturation a bit and then find something on the orange side. Well, actually let's increase it full that we can see the orange properly. Maybe something like that. It's kind of cool. And I know it looks horrible, just bear with me. In our shadows, we want to probably get some blues into those, maybe something like that. Now I can, of course, that is very strong right now, but I can adjust the amount. So I'm going to always drag it to 0 and now increase it ever so slightly just to find the point where I kind of like it, right? So for instance, if I were to leave it here and I look at the before, and well, that's maybe a bit too much before, but the before here, you see that the image takes on a bit more of an evening feel because we apply a little bit of a reddish color into the highlights, which is normally what the sun projects anyway, and a little bit more blue into the shadows, shadows normally have a bit more blue. So it is something that I very often do, maybe not to that extent, but of course depends on your image. Moving on. The dodge and burn section essentially allows you to take a brush and paint certain areas brighter or certain areas darker. Usual dodge and burn procedure, nothing specific about that. And lastly, we have our vignette. Now, vignette simply means that, let's switch it on, I'm going to get a darker circle on the outside, whereas the center stays either at the same brightness, or I can even increase the brightness in the very center if I feel like. Now, of course, you can set certain things like how much you want to have the darkness and stuff like that, but that's just a normal vignette, so feel free to experiment with that, but it is definitely there. Cool. So now once I have done all these changes that I want to my image, which are not done obviously because I didn't actually apply much, but I could now save at the bottom here this particular thing that I have done as a new look if I wanted to. So I can give it a name, call it, I don't know, random tutorial look, and then it would show up in my look section at the bottom right here for me to use again, which can be very handy if you, for instance, process the same images or similar styles of images from one scenario. Like I have like 1,000 from this place here, which is Amalfi in, well, nope, that's a lie. That's actually Positano. And so obviously I have 1,000 images from here because it was a very beautiful place. And if I wanted to edit more, I could do so by simply saving that and applying it to the next image. So that is very quickly the different functions or different adjustments that are available to you within Aurora HDR 2019. So I did mention layers before, and so far I haven't gone into it, but now you understand what is available, and now I can actually show you how layers play into that equation. Now layers are something that many of you most likely know from Photoshop, so we're going to use it now in Aurora to actually selectively apply certain adjustments into certain areas in our image. And I'm just going to again use random examples. This would probably not be how I would usually process an image, but might as well. So for instance, if we switch everything back to normal, so that's how it came out of Aurora, I think, more or less. Let's just to make sure reset everything. Oh yeah, that's how it came out. Cool. So usually what I do when I start is after I did all my lens correction, all this stuff, I create a new adjustment layer, right? So I just hit the little plus symbol where it says layers and create a new adjustment layer. What I can do now here is, for instance, I'm only looking, let's just say the buildings. Okay, I'm only looking at the buildings right now. So I would now make certain adjustments that would only be for the buildings. Let's say I want to add a little bit more clarity to these buildings. We can even zoom into them a little bit. Let's say something like that. And maybe add a little bit more color. So let's saturate these buildings a little bit more to something like that. And just a little bit of denoise maybe, might as well, why not? radiance. I don't know if we need that for the buildings. Probably we actually don't. We can add some sharpness, so some detail essentially to these buildings. And let's just say that's all for now, because why not? Now, what I can do now is I can zoom out and I can select a little brush symbol here to the left-hand side of the eye symbol for that layer. So if I hit that, I can now decide how do I want to bring this particular adjustment into my image. So I can select the brush, make a radial mask or a gradient mask. In this case, let's just use the brush. Once you do that, you're going to go into brushing mode. So you can either say I want to paint that effect into my image, or I want to erase that effect into my image. Set your size, your softness and opacity for your brush, and just start painting in that particular effect into the areas that you feel like, well, where it should be. And once you do that, just hit the done button and you can switch it off and on. In my case, I didn't actually make that many adjustments, so probably not much will be visible, but let's have a quick look here. If I switch it off and on and off and on, yeah, the buildings are popping a little bit more, which is not too bad. Awesome. Let's say I also want to have a little bit of a darker foreground, and again, that's just random examples. I can add a new adjustment layer, and I use a lot of layers. I can either add a vignette, or I can just simply use my curve here. So I'm going to drag my curve down to something like that, because might as well. And now I can hit the little brush symbol, select the gradient mask, and just drag bottom up, just to increase the brightness, decrease the brightness actually, in the foreground area. So let's say something like this, right? I can also make the transition a bit more harsh if I want to, maybe something like that. Cool. Again, these are very random examples, but if I switch it off and on, you see it's only where I put it. Now, the cool thing is that obviously you can put one adjustment layer for your sky, or you can put 5 for the sky, 2 for the foreground, and then as detailed as you have to go, just like in Photoshop, which is why I think this is great that you have that available here, because it actually gets you used to the principle of layers, which you can then apply to Photoshop down the line should you decide to ever use it. Awesome. Now, one last thing that I just want to quickly mention, but not really go into detail, is that you also have blend modes available. Now, blend modes are something, again, that is known from Photoshop, so if you have no idea what those are, don't worry about them just yet. You're gonna encounter them sooner or later, but you can always choose any given layer into different blend modes that you would also find in Photoshop, for example, which comes in handy depending on, well, the way you edit and what you need to do. Also, we might be able to reduce that opacity of our foreground darkness a little bit to something like that. Handy opacity slider. Awesome, so now that we had a look at the interface itself and the different options that are available to you when it comes to editing and all these sliders, let's have a look at a couple of examples. Let's edit 1 or 2 images together just to get a feel as to how fast this might work when you actually start digging into it. Alright, so back at our image folder, let's grab the next 3, and I'm just going to drag and drop them in the side here to Aurora HDR 19. Well, 2019. Cool, so again I want to hit the auto align button because I think I was handheld and I just want to make sure that everything lines up just nicely. And also because I have a lot of waves in it again, I'm going to use ghost reduction. So I'm going to hit OK and create HDR. Now I'll sit back for a second because it will take a moment if I switch all these things on, and hang in there. Awesome, and here we go. So let's have a quick look at the before and after without actually doing anything. So this would be the 0 exposure and this would be the HDR. I love how crisp it is straight away and that we have a bit more texture in the clouds to work with. And also, actually in this case, I would probably always look at the looks at the bottom just to get a feel. The cool thing is that Aurora will try to identify the theme of your image and it's going to offer you the most appropriate looks for your image, right? So right now it's obviously landscape, so I'm going to get landscape looks. If I want to get them all, I always can do that as well. Just click on collections and get to all again. Awesome. Now, here, having said that, while I was actually recording that, I just saw this warm landscape in the mini preview and it looks freaking awesome. So let's have a click and see. Oh damn, I love that. The only thing I don't love too much is we have a little bit too much color saturation going on in the rocks themselves. So let's check again according to what I said before. If I click on the look, it's going to apply the settings onto the right hand side panel. So I can actually get rid of my looks and can now only work with the settings. So I can see it didn't do anything in HDR basic. It increased saturation of vibrance a little bit. Let's continue on though. A bit of smart structure like random stuff, blah blah. And here is the culprit. So we have LUT mapping, which is again the kind of style applied to your image. And it has warm midtone selected. So I'm sure if I were to switch that off, all the red will go away. Let's see. Yep, and we are back more in the original kind of tone. So if I switch it on again, but that's far too crazy, obviously, I'm trying to find the middle point now where I feel it is still Like we have enough saturation, but also the sky, I want to keep the color there a little bit. So if we keep it here, what I can do now to fix it up a little bit, as I go down to the bottom, I find the red or the orange, and I'm going to try to decrease those to see what it does. And actually using the red button really takes the red out of the rocks a little bit, which is kind of awesome. So I'm probably going to go somewhere here. Yeah, maybe somewhere here doesn't look too bad. Now also the orange, I could take that down, but that takes a lot of color out of it, so I have to be careful not to go too crazy here. Maybe something like that. And also maybe just a tiny bit the blues, because they are extremely aggressive right now. So let's just pull them down a notch. Cool. So if we look at the before, boring, after, awesome. Cool, let's continue on. I think we're going to make a new layer. I always have this thing where I make new layers. I don't know why, but that's just me. You don't have to be like that. Don't be like me. Let's continue on and actually add a little bit of a vignette here. So I'm just going to create a little bit just like that, maybe. And increase the brightness in the center of the image. Give it a little bit of feathering and maybe decrease the size just to something like that. Really just to make sure that the person that looks at that image is drawn into the image relatively fast. So if I have a quick look before and after, that works for me. Now what I also would like to do, I think, is to take some brightness away from the lower left-hand corner here. So I'm going to create, guess what, a new layer. Jump down to my curves, decrease that just to make the image a little bit darker. Maybe to something like that. And now I can decide how I want to bring that in the image. So I might just simply go for a gradient because I am a very lazy person. Maybe something like that. And now I can decide how much of my foreground I want to actually darken down a little bit. But I think that is kind of cool. So we could now also take a bit of saturation out here, but I actually kind of like that. I think this is my jam. I like very colorful images, so for me this is definitely a place where I would want it to go. So if I switch that off here and we look at the general before and after, I think the whole image is just so much more exciting and poppy. I really, really dig that. Now we could go ahead and add more sharpness and things like that into the rocks, but I think we might actually be not bad. I mean, zooming in 124%, everything looks sharp enough. I don't think I have to force the issue there even more. Cool, so that's our first example, quickly before and after. I'm probably going to post it as a separate video as well, because that's far too cool to be hidden here in this longer video. So let's move on to our last image example, which is 1, 2, 3. This one right here. So I'm going to drag that over, not into 18, but in 19. I'm not going to save that now because it was far too fast, and I can always do it again. Again, I have waves. I'm going to hit Ghost Reduction, create HDR, lean back and chill out for a second. Okay, and here we are. Now, this particular photo is going to be very dramatic. I mean, the clouds literally scream for drama. Before I do that though, which I didn't do in the other image, it will bug me forever if I don't straighten that horizon out ever so slightly, maybe to something like that. Hit the enter button just to apply some cribbity-crobbity there. Cool, so how do we make that dramatic? In this case, I could now go through and make these things manual. However, it turns out that many of the looks that Aurora has pre-installed are extremely dramatic, and usually I just take it from there. So I just look at any that looks dramatic, like this one, the anti-vegan tiger again. Anti-vegan tiger. I wonder who comes up with these names. Anyway, so now we have added already a little bit of drama to our image. And now we can take it from there depending on what we want to do. So in this case, it doesn't really look like an evening shot, and it's just very gray and dark. So I'm not even going to try to make it colorful and pop and stuff like that. So I'm just going to simply create a new layer on top of the layers that I already have, which is only one. And I'm going to bring actually the saturation down a little bit. I need this to be a little bit more dull probably. And let's see if we bring the vibrance down, it loses too much, so we're going to keep that. Cool. Now I could add more clarity, but I think we already have enough action, let's say, in the clouds. Denoise will definitely need in a moment. I will add some image radiance, and I think it's going to be kind of cool for the clouds, just to add some light in there. Yeah, I think that'll look nice, but I'm not going to do that now, because otherwise I'll have it in the whole image, right? And I don't want that. So I'm going to make a separate layer for that. Details we don't need, no, not really. I think I'm just going to be happy with a little bit of a vignette there. So let's add a vignette right here. Let's bring it into something like that. It is a very dark and gray and dull scene, so we might as well feather this out a little bit and just bring the inner brightness up ever so slightly. Maybe something like that. And let's decrease the size of that bad boy a little bit, maybe to something like this. Awesome. Let's hit the new layer symbol. Jump down to the, where is it, image radiance. bring that up only looking at the clouds right now. And I think just ever so slightly something like that looks kind of cool. So I'm going to take, what are we going to take this time? Let's take the radial mask. Why not? So I'm just going to drag the area where I want to have this particular adjustment into the image. So let's drag it like something like that. Might not have been the best choice I have ever thought of, but okay, now we made it. Now we're going to be stubborn and we're going to deal with it. Okay, cool. So now we have it everywhere else. So I actually want to invert that. So I'm just going to hit the invert button. And now, at least to the best of our ability, using a radial mask, we have it in our image now. So if I look at the before that change and after the change, you see that the clouds are now a little bit more lit, which is all I really wanted. I don't want to add too much emphasis on them. Awesome. And I think another thing we could probably do is to add a bit more darkness in the foreground. It's still a bit too bright for my taste right here. So simply create another curve adjustment. Yeah, well, actually, might as well create another layer for a curve, bring it down to something like that, let's say, which is also very dramatic and cool. And I'm just going to use a gradient mask to quickly drop that somewhere in here. Maybe somewhere here. I think that's going to be kind of cool. Awesome. And let's have a quick look at the general before and after. I think I like that a lot. It looks way more dramatic. We could obviously go in and change the colors a bit more if we wanted to and things like that. But I think actually I'm quite satisfied. So if we get rid of all the junk around us and we're going to make that fit to the screen, here we go. Yeah, I think I'm actually good with that. Awesome. Now these were obviously two very quick and simple examples, but I have used Aurora HDR not just 2019 but also 2018, its predecessor, so often, and I am definitely a massive fan, which is also the reason that I'm actually making these videos. It is one of the best HDR softwares out there in my personal opinion. Of course, you have to make your own opinion. And that brings me to the pricing of the good old software, which is it seems a little bit high. So if you have never used Aurora before at all, you can get it for, I think it's $100 or something like that, or $99 if I'm not mistaken. Or if you're currently using Aurora 2018 and you're trying to upgrade to 19, then I think you can get it for $59 or something like that. Now that is a one-off price. You don't have to pay again, like you buy it and you own it, different to Lightroom and Photoshop and all these things where you keep paying for the service every single month. But as I said, in my personal opinion, it is definitely worth spending that amount of money for a software that you can use every single day if this is the kind of photography you're doing. And obviously I just have shown you examples now where I import 3 separate images, so 3 different exposures as an HDR. It is extremely powerful if you only take one image as well and put that in, and I'm going to upload some images in the future that will actually demonstrate it a little bit better. Now the only thing I can do is help you save 10%. So if you use the promo code Let's Image at checkout, you're gonna only get you're only gonna get less. No, you're gonna pay less. You're gonna pay $89, and that should definitely be worth it. But again, do make your own opinion, do try the trial version and see if you like it or not. And of course, let me know how you get on down there in the comments. So I hope this video was a little bit useful for you to get a first insight into Aurora HDR 2019. Don't forget to check out my HDR tutorial with all the basics that you need to get started in this beautiful, let's say, specific niche of photography. And yeah, then good luck. Now remember, if you did like the video, do not forget to hit the thumbs up button, and also if you're new, don't forget to subscribe. I'm gonna pump out tutorials for Photoshop, Luminar, Aurora HDR, and whatever comes my way and I use as well, just to, show you how things can be done. Whatever, I'm out of here and I shall see you next time. Bye!